I'm Idiotech, and today I'm going to review Project Cars for PC. So what is Project Cars? Well, according to the developers, it's the next generation of racing simulators. I'm not so sure I agree with that. Unfortunately, this game has a significant number of technical issues when it comes to AMD graphics cards. If you are running an AMD graphics card and you are interested in buying this game, do not buy this game right now. Avoid this game like the plague. It is severely broken on AMD cards to the point where Nvidia cards that are like 2 generations behind an AMD card are massively outperforming that card. It is bad, guys. So essentially what the developer said was, it's not our fault, AMD haven't bothered to customize their drivers for our game. We worked with Nvidia, Nvidia helped us, AMD didn't help us. Apparently they gave AMD keys and gave them the opportunity to make drivers that worked well with this game, but unfortunately AMD didn't take up that opportunity, apparently, according to the developer. We don't really know, but that's all we do know, and hopefully someone fixes it soon, because honestly, it runs like crap on AMD cards, guys. If you, for example, I'll give you an example. If you run the Nürburgring on your own, just a time trial, you can max out the game, no problem, on an R90. An R9 290, which is what I'm running. Runs absolutely perfectly, 60 FPS all the time, no problem whatsoever. As soon as I introduce AI into the mix, it drops down to anywhere between 15 and 30 depending on the weather effects. It's absolutely unplayable at ultra settings. So what I have to do is I have to drop it down to medium settings if I'm running an AI race, and if I'm running on my own, I have to bump it up to ultra, which is stupid and needs to be addressed immediately. Other bugs I have, occasionally the engine won't start when I start a game. Which is strange, and if I just restart, it fixes the problem. And another bug that I have and other people have reported with a varying degree of wheels is that the H shifter, when driving a sequential car, so a car that has flappy paddles, will operate sequentially instead of how it should. So if I drop from 5th to 2nd, for example, it will drop from 5th to 4th. Which is confusing and irritating, and games like Assetto Corsa fix this by disabling the H shifter in cars that don't support it, etc, etc. So I'm hoping they fix that, because it's very annoying for wheel users right now. And obviously they need to fix the AMD issues, whether that be AMD's fault or whether it be the developer's fault. It's not acceptable. It needs to be fixed immediately. So until it is, don't buy the game if you have an AMD graphics card. So in terms of the user interface, it's pretty good. It's clean, there's mouse control in the menus, which is always good to see. The graphics options in particular are fantastic in this game. We've got 2 entire pages of options to choose from. Everything you could want to change, you can change. We also have 3 different kinds of anti-aliasing, and on top of that, we can downsample from up to 12 times native resolution. Honestly, one of the best graphics options menus I've ever seen in a game. You can control every element of the in-game HUD, which is good to see, and you can remap controls for the Xbox controller, PC, and the wheel. Honestly, guys, it's a pretty perfect options menu. The only small issue I've had is that when I have to change my graphics settings, I have to restart the game. So if you're having performance problems like I am, you're going to spend a lot of time changing an option, restarting the game, and that can get a bit frustrating. So, for the most part, the game looks really, really good. Excusing the fact that it runs like shit on AMD systems, it looks really, really nice. The post-processing is great, motion blur, haze, bloom, sun flares, weather effects, time of day system, really, really good. Honestly, really, really nice looking game. However, it's maybe not as good as the marketing material leads you to believe. Now, that could just be because of the angles and stuff they've chosen in some of those screenshots, but it doesn't look that great when you're actually driving around. It does look good, but not that good. And I think some of the hype for this game, in terms of its visuals, is a little sort of out of proportion, to be honest. There's nothing here I haven't seen before. There's nothing groundbreaking or next generation. It looks like, you know, a really, really nice looking PC game, but it's not some kind of masterpiece in terms of visuals. It's not this next generation groundbreaking experience that's going to blow your mind. So, I personally really, really like the music in this game an awful lot. I think it's very epic, it fits the theme really well, it's got these little slices of crew sounds and car sounds and stuff like that. I really like it. It amps you up, it makes you excited to play the game, it sort of fits with the whole, like, you know, building a career from nothing to being like the best race driver in the world. I think it's really good, I think it suits the game well, and it's really well produced. Sound, on the other hand, not so great. When you compare it to other games on the market, such as Assetto Corsa, the cars feel kind of weak and almost comical in some cases. The Zonda, for example, it sounds very, very silly and high-pitched and doesn't have any bass to it. You know, there's not much dynamic range here in the sound effects. And the other sound effects, road effects, curb effects, they sound kind of generic and canned, to be honest. It's nice, but I mean, I've just gotten off the back of playing the new Dirt Rally game, for example. And that is miles ahead of this game in terms of sound quality. It's fine, it does the job, it's serviceable, but it's not in any way the best sound in any racing game on the market today. Voice, also very, very weak. The tutorials are delivered via this woman who reads, you know, a script to you, essentially explaining the various aspects of the game. She sounds completely robotic. She has no passion or excitement in her voice. When you compare it with games from Codemasters, for example, the Formula 1 series, where you have your crewmates explaining various aspects of the game and tutorializing bits to you, it's so much worse than games like that, you know? Like, the F1 series really, really emphasizes how cool it is that you're racing a Formula 1 car. This is just really generic and boring and delivered with no passion or excitement whatsoever. The crew voices are a little bit better. They seem a little bit more genuine, but the information they provide you with is absolutely useless. He'll for example, say, oh, the car in front of you, put pressure on him. You know, great. Could you tell me about my tire condition or something useful, please? Especially if you turn the UI off, you know, you need to know what your tires are doing and he won't give you that information. It'd be nice to know what my lap time was. You know, it'd be nice to know like how fast I was through that sector. He doesn't give you any of that kind of information. The information he gives you is really boring, generic, and useless most of the time. So music really good, sound okay, voice really weak. So this game has a lot to offer when it comes to game modes. We've got career, solo, free practice, online, events, time trials. There's an awful lot to go through, so I'll try and get through it quickly. Career mode's pretty simple, to be honest. Essentially, you just sign up, you pick a division you want to race in, you do a few races, you do some qualifiers and some practices. There's some conditions depending on the motorsport that you have to meet, and if you do well, you'll get offered positions to race with other teams using different cars. And that's essentially it. Now, I would have liked to have seen a more robust progression system here, something similar to Forza or Gran Turismo if you've played games like that, where you can buy cars, upgrade them, tune them, you know, respray them, do all that stuff, keep them in your garage. That kind of progression system would have been really, really nice and would have fit really, really well with this career mode. Unfortunately, it's not there. So I'm hoping at some point in the future this is something they introduce, hopefully for free, because right now it kind of feels the same as solo mode, which I'll move on to next. So solo mode is really good in my opinion. You get to pick the number of opponents, the track, the car. You can set various parameters. You can choose the conditions. You can choose whether there's practicing or qualifying events. Essentially, you can make your own events from the career mode, right? And so for me personally, I enjoy that a lot more because I can race exactly what I want to race. I think honestly, the solo mode kind of trumps the career mode right now, and it's kind of the main game mode in terms of like single player AI driving, for me at least. Practice essentially is pointless because you have time trials, which are the same thing, but you get to race against other people's ghosts. So I think, honestly, practice is a little bit pointless right now, but it's there if you want to use it. Online is actually really good. I'm surprised at how well it works. I didn't have very much lag. It works generally pretty well. There are collisions, so you will get the occasional person just ramming into you, but that's the same as it is with all multiplayer racing games. But considering that it could have been quite bad in terms of netcode and lag, it's actually really good and works really well. I think it might be region locked actually, because a lot of the people I play against, and I'm from Australia, are always picking the Bathurst track, which is an Australian track, and they tend to have names that are sort of Australian in nature, so it seems that maybe it's region locked, which is kind of a problem actually, because once the game gets a little older, maybe when there's less players, especially where I come from, where there are less people in my country, it may be hard to find games. And that's the real issue right now. No one seems to be playing it at all, to be honest. Like, every time I go in there, there's either one or no lobbies running at all. I tried to create a game at one point and had to wait 30 minutes and no one joined, which is kind of concerning. Now, it could just be because the game's still very new and everyone was playing all this sort of solo stuff. I hope that's the case, because right now, no one's really playing the online mode at all. And even though it works well, it's kind of disappointing to see no one really using it. Events. So this is another sort of multiplayer aspect of the game, and it's a time trials based system. But events work like this. The developer will pick a track and conditions and a car, right? And everyone has to try and compete for the best time. And if you win, you get real world prizes, which is really, really cool. So right now there's one up for a Thrustmaster equipment, which is awesome. And if they can get brand deals like that where they can give away prizes to people who win and do these events regularly, I think that's a really, really cool idea, and I think a lot of people will really get involved in that. Time trials is the same thing, obviously. It's just that in time trials, you pick the car, you pick the track, and you can choose a ghost for that car track combination to race against from someone online, and then you place on a leaderboard. That's personally how I like to use the multiplayer systems in this game. And maybe that's why no one's actually playing the standard multiplayer mode, but it's really enjoyable for me just to try and set good times and beat other people in that way. The final feature really is the garage, and so the garage doesn't really do much right now. You can take some photos of some cars, you can set up some sort of custom performance tuning, and then pick a livery, and that's kind of it. It would have been really nice to see something more like Forza here, or GT, and it's just not there, unfortunately. So hopefully they flesh this out in future. There are a lot of tracks in this game, a lot. Some of them fictional, but the ones that are there that are real world tracks, there's an awful lot of them. A lot of British tracks, which I appreciate. There's an awful lot here, guys. More than most other games that I've played recently, actually. So that's a really, really good thing. They're recreated well for the most part. They're not as good as games like Assetto Corsa that uses laser scan technology and you can feel every little bump in the road. But that's partly to do with force feedback, which I'll come on to later. But for the most part, they're recreated really, really well, and they look nice. So there are some performance issues on a few of the tracks. Unfortunately, they have not been optimized particularly well, and you will get significant frame drops at points. But for the most part, lots of tracks, nothing wrong with that, really, really cool. In terms of the cars, there's not as many as you might think, given the name is Project Cars, right? There's more than probably Assetto Corsa has, but a lot less than you would find in Gran Turismo or Forza, for example. So I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed on this, and there are a lot of big brands missing from the game. So Ferrari, for example, not in the game. Lamborghini, not in the game. Nissan, not in the game. Alfa Romeo, not in the game. Porsche, not in the game. Now, some of these are due to licensing problems. For example, Porsche, EA has the exclusive license to use their cars in their games, so I can understand that. But Alfa Romeo, Nissan, Lamborghini, Ferrari, yes, some of these are expensive, but Assetto Corsa is also a crowd-funded game, so if they can get Ferraris and Nissans and Alphas, maybe these guys should be looking at that too. Maybe they are, maybe it'll come in the form of DLC, but right now some of the iconic cars and brands that people enjoy in racing games are not in this game. However, there are a lot of cars, unique cars, some interesting track day cars, etc. And for the most part, I don't have a problem with the cars. I prefer, honestly, personally, that there were less cars, but they handled well, than having a massive selection of cars that all kind of handle the same. But it would be nice to see some of these brands, and I'm sure a lot of people would be disappointed that those aren't there. This is kind of where the contentious stuff comes in here, other than the graphic stuff, obviously, but is it a sim, is it not a sim? Honestly, I think it's somewhere in the middle. It's more forgiving than most other simulators I've played. It's pretty easy to recover if you mess up. It feels honestly dumbed down, and I assume that's because they're trying to make this game for both the consoles and the PC, and you can't have an incredibly realistic simulator on a console, because it will frustrate people, especially given the fact they're using a controller and most of them won't have wheels. So, as a result though, it does feel dumbed down. If I was to place it anywhere, I would say it's somewhere between Gran Turismo and Forza and Assetto Corsa. It's not anywhere near as realistic as Assetto Corsa, but it's also not as arcadey as Forza and GT is, for example. So, it sits somewhere in the middle there. Nonetheless, it's very fun to race. I enjoy it a lot, and the AI is good. There's no 10-car pileups at the beginning of a race. The AI, for the most part, defends their positions. They're aggressive sometimes, but reasonably aggressive. You know, I've been spun out once by the AI. So it does feel good. They will knock you about a bit sometimes, but it's nothing egregious, nothing that's going to really, really irritate you or frustrate you in any way. I think the AI, for the most part, is really good, and you can really tune their difficulty to find, like, you know, something that really suits you, and so you end up with a really evenly matched race. I think the AI is great, to be honest. There's also lots of assists and lots of good difficulty options. So depending on your level of skill, you can really, really customize the game to work for you, which I think is really good to see. Unfortunately, and this is one of the sort of core issues here, is the controls. And for me, I use a force feedback wheel, I use a G27, other people are using other kinds of wheels, but everyone's reporting the same thing, and that is that the force feedback is pretty poor, to be honest. There's no road feel. I can be driving at like 200 kilometers an hour down a road, bouncing around all over the place, and I feel nothing in the wheel. The center of the wheel is completely dead most of the time. All you really get is just resistance when cornering, and when you lose grip, you lose that resistance and it slips out and you can feel that. And that's literally it. I mean, you can drive over curbs, you can go off-road, and half the time you won't feel anything. The other times, you will occasionally get a little jolt or a little bump, but it's really weak here, guys. Like, you can barely feel anything. Half the time I feel like I'm ice skating. It's very poor, and I hope that they do something to fix it pretty soon. That being said, there are an awful lot of force feedback options. You've got force feedback options that are just general and apply to the wheel, and then you also have force feedback options for every single car in the game that you can customize and save profiles for. But the problem here is a lot of that stuff is very, very complicated and not very well explained, so I'm hoping that people on the forums of various sim racing sites can work out a good profile for this game that gives us something worthwhile. However, I don't think it's going to solve the issues relating to road feel, because I just don't think they've been programmed into the game. So if you are using a wheel, you are going to be slightly disappointed by the performance of the force feedback in this game. It isn't very good. As for controllers, the game feels actually okay on controllers. I played with the Xbox controller for a bit. It seems fine. You know, I'd assumed it would be fine given the fact the game's going to be on Xbox and PlayStation, so if you do run with a controller, you're not going to have too many problems. If you live anywhere in the world outside of Australia, you will pay $50 for this game. And for that price, given the amount of content that's available here, I think that's a reasonable price to charge, honestly. Assetto Corsa is the same price and honestly has less content than this game. So I think $50 is a pretty reasonable price to ask. Now, if you live in Australia, you'll be paying $70 for this game, and when you take into account the exchange rate, you'll be paying just shy of 100 Australian dollars. That's completely unacceptable. It's one of those games where we have to pay the Australia tax, guys, so if you're from Australia, be aware you're getting massively screwed and maybe look somewhere other than Steam to purchase this game. Green Man Gaming is a good example of that. In terms of DLC, we don't know. I assume there will be DLC. It's pretty obvious that a game like this will have DLC. It's kind of primed for it, cars, tracks, etc, etc. I don't have a problem with that as long as the DLC is actually good. You know, we get some decent cars, some decent tracks. No problem there, have no issues, that's fine. Microtransactions, doesn't seem to be any evidence of those so far, so I can assume so far that we're not going to get any. So overall, business model's fine unless you live in Australia. So my conclusion for Project Cars. This is a tough one, guys, honestly, because I have had fun playing this game. You know, it's not a bad game in any way, other than the performance issues. It's not a bad game. But I have to ask the question, who is this game for? Because if you're a simulation fan, if you're a guy who plays R Factor and Assetto Corsa and Richard Burns Rally and that level of simulation, and you have a wheel, right? The handling and the force feedback is just not there in this game. You know, it's forgiving, it's easy, you know, it's too difficult to spin out. The force feedback's like barely there at all. It doesn't exist most of the time. You're going to be disappointed by the game. And if you're a Forza and Gran Turismo fan, you're going to find the limited car pool here compared to the games you're used to playing, and the lack of customization and career progression disappointing. So I have to ask, who is this game for? Because to me, it feels like they were planning to make the ultimate car game, you know, combining the best of simulation with the best of the console games and arcade games, and creating this really awesome combination of everything that's good about racing games. And in the process of doing that and trying to appeal to so many people, they've kind of just ended up making this generic game that doesn't fit into anyone's niche. Right now, if you want to play a rally game, you pick up Dirt Rally. If you want to play a simulation game, you pick up iRacing or Assetto Corsa, right? If you want to play a game with tons of career progression and hundreds of cars, you play Forza or Gran Turismo. I don't see what the point of this game is. I don't see who it's for or who it's trying to target. And when you combine that with the performance issues that every person with an AMD card is likely to be experiencing right now, I just can't recommend this game, guys. Maybe when it comes down in price, you know, it is fun, but it's no more fun than any of the other games available right now. And all the other games have something better that this game doesn't have. So that's my review of Project Cars, guys. If you hate me and think I'm an awful person now and want to tell me so, then comment below. Otherwise, like, favorite, subscribe, do all the things that people tell you to do at the end of YouTube videos, and I'll see you guys next time.